So I don't want my earnest money sitting somewhere that I can't get back in the event something happens out of my control. I don't want to be in that situation. I've been in that situation. That sucks. An earnest money deposit is a sum of money paid up front by a buyer to show their good faith in order to execute a contract with a seller. But if you're not careful, you could put that money at risk and lose it. So in today's video, I'll show 4 rules to always protect your earnest money. You'll even get to look over my shoulder and watch me on the phone, so you get to see how to do it in action. All of that and more coming up.
For a limited time, you can get a free copy of Jerry Norton's Quick Start Kit with everything you need to flip your first house in 30 days or less. Download it now at myquickstartkit.com.
If you're new here to the channel, I'm Jerry Norton with FlippingMastery.com, and this channel is all about ways to help you make money wholesaling and flipping real estate so you can live your dream life. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications so you don't miss new videos. In case you don't know, the standard procedure when executing a contract is that the buyer pay earnest money as a good faith that they are going to buy the property. Now, the idea behind earnest money is if the buyer does not make good on their end of the agreement, the seller gets to keep the earnest money. If you're a wholesaler, you have 2 earnest money deposits to deal with and worry about. You have the earnest money that you pay to the seller on the original purchase and sale agreement, and you also have to collect an earnest money from your cash buyer that you're flipping your contract to. And just so you know, earnest money is completely negotiable. Typically, when I'm dealing directly with a private seller, I'll put in my contract anywhere from $10 to $100, which isn't very much to be overly concerned about. But with on-market deals where agents are involved, earnest money is typically $500 to $1,000, and sometimes much higher, which is definitely worth protecting. But things get real serious when you're dealing with the cash buyer's earnest money, because this is typically much more. As a wholesaler, your goal is to get a substantial deposit from your cash buyer. Now, I did a video where I break down how critical it is to get a large non-refundable deposit from your cash buyer. I'll put a link to that video in the description below, and you can watch it later. It's common to see wholesalers require $2,500 to $5,000 or more as a deposit in order to go under contract on their deals. Now, whether you're a wholesaler paying a deposit to a seller or a cash buyer paying a deposit to a wholesaler, the premise of this video is to help you make sure you always protect your earnest money. Now, I'm even going to cut to a very important conversation I just had with my title company on a deal I'm doing right now where I need to pay a $3,000 earnest money, so keep watching. The problem with earnest money and where everyone gets in trouble isn't when you don't perform as the buyer. That part is easy. If you're a wholesaler and you don't keep your end of the contract, you forfeit your earnest money to the seller. And if you're a cash buyer and you don't perform for whatever reason, you lose your earnest money. That's just how it works. If that happens, which it will, if it hasn't yet, trust me, it will. And if it's your fault that the deal didn't close because you couldn't pull off the funding or you couldn't find a buyer, just man up or woman up and lose your earnest money. It sucks, but that's the risk you took when you signed the contract and paid the earnest money. That's not the real issue here. The issue is what happens if the deal doesn't make it to closing and it wasn't your fault, which happens all the time. I would guess that 25 to 30% of executed contracts with sellers never make it to closing. It could be from a break in the chain of title, liens on the property, or a number of other reasons. Now, I wish it wasn't so, and trust me when I tell you, getting back your earnest money can be a challenge, and I have 4 rules that if you follow, you'll always get back your earnest money. Rule number 1 is just plain common sense, but I see this mistake happen over and over, and it's to always let the closing escrow company hold the earnest money. They will put it in a secure escrow account, and it will be applied to closing if and when the deal funds, and in theory, it will be returned if the deal doesn't close and it's not your fault. Now, I said in theory, so stick around to hear rule number 3. This means never, ever, ever, how much clearer can I be with this? Don't ever give your earnest money to the seller or the wholesaler. Just don't. Regardless of what the contract says, if the deal falls apart and it was outside your control and not your fault, the seller or wholesaler may not give it back because some people just suck like that. Now, I recently was trying to buy a deal from a wholesaler, and he was requiring a $3,000 non-refundable deposit made payable to him. Now, I confronted him about letting escrow hold the earnest money, and he refused and demanded that I pay it to him. Now, just so you know, when a wholesaler wants to hold their earnest money and refuses to let the title hold it, there's about a 100% chance it's a scam. And what are you going to do? Spend $10,000 in legal fees suing him to get back your $3,000 earnest money? I doubt it. Well, I would just because of the principle of it, but that's not smart. All of that can be avoided by letting title hold the earnest money. Rule number 2 is to make sure the contract is crystal clear in writing that if for whatever reason the deal doesn't close outside of your control, that your earnest money deposit is refunded back to you. Now this is another touchy topic for a lot of crappy wholesalers. I see wholesalers put in their contract non-refundable deposit for any reason whatsoever. Now, as a cash buyer, I'm okay to agree to non-refundable if I don't perform, but if the seller doesn't perform, I want my earnest money back. Never agree to a blanket statement that your deposit is non-refundable for any reason. In fact, go out of your way to add language that makes it clear that your earnest money is to be refunded if it doesn't close for any reason whatsoever that isn't your fault. When signing a contract with a seller, and especially if you're a cash buyer buying a deal from a wholesaler, there are 2 things that must be added to the contract. First is this: seller agrees to provide free and clear title with a warranty deed and title insurance. This means that if there are any issues whatsoever with title, including liens, unpaid taxes, outstanding water bills, judgments, etc., title won't issue insurance and it won't be a deal, which is the seller's fault. Now, I want that added even if it's implied, and as a cash buyer signing an assignment, I want that added even if it's already in the original contract with the seller. Okay, the second thing I want added is if for whatever reason whatsoever this transaction does not close due to circumstances outside of the control of the buyer, seller, and all parties involved, agree to immediately release the earnest money to buyer. Now, putting that in writing draws attention to it, and it lets the seller and the wholesaler know that you're not screwing around, and it lets title know what to do in the event there's an issue. Remember, if there is a dispute later, a mediator is going to refer to the contract, so keep it tight. Okay, the third rule that's often overlooked, even by experienced investors, is to find out the title company's earnest money dispute policy. Now, many states and many title companies require that all parties agree to release the earnest money, and if everyone doesn't agree, no one gets it, and it sits in the title company's escrow forever. That means if the deal doesn't close and it's the seller's fault, and he's a jerk and doesn't agree to release it back to you, title keeps it, which means you don't get it back. Now, some title companies have a mediation process where title will look over the contract, refer to rule number 2, and review the facts and then decide who should get the earnest money. Now, this was the case on a recent deal where a Phoenix wholesaler, Randy Guzman, who we call Randy the Scammer or Randy the Con Artist, Randy the Bullshitter, Randy the Crook, Randy the Dirtbag, Randy the Sleazeball, tried to scam me on a deal and then wanted to keep the earnest money. I did a video all about it where I exposed him. If you want to see the ugly side of this business, watch that video. It's an eye-opener, link in the description. But in that situation, my case went through the title's internal mediation and they immediately returned my earnest money, even though Randy the Shyster was demanding that they release it to him. So the rule is to always call title and ask about their process of returning earnest money if there is an issue. Now, I recently recorded a call where I was having this exact conversation with title. Take a listen. So I don't want my earnest money sitting somewhere that I can't get back in the event something happens out of my control. I don't want to be in that situation. I've been in that situation. That sucks. And explain to me how release of earnest money happens. Let's say that there's an issue and the file can't close for whatever reason.
The seller can't clear title because you're ensuring that they can clear title. You know, because you're the ones who are bringing the funds, so that way you can purchase this property.
And I'm buying a full, and I'm getting a full warranty deed, right, with title insurance.
Yep.
So if the seller can't perform, if the seller can't provide that, then we got no deal.
Correct. Right. If the seller can't perform, or if the seller can't say that you have clear title, and then any other items that are outstanding, and if they can't come to clear title, then you really don't have a deal, and the funds should be returned.
What language would you need to see that's strong enough to where if something happens outside of my control, because there's multiple parties involved in this deal, so I'm at the end of the totem pole, right? So if something happens along the way, I don't want to get stuck. $3,000 in earnest money now that I can't get back.
Right.
And let's just say Rav or the seller or whoever doesn't sign off on releasing the earnest money if the deal dies. You would go ahead and release it back to me because the contract clearly states that if it's not my fault, I get it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we would do that.
That's what I needed to know, Rav. Now notice how I wanted to confirm with the title agent that we use language acceptable to him in the event there is an issue. And as an extra precaution, I have a fourth rule that I'll follow if my earnest money is ever more than $5,000, and that is to wait until title does the title search and confirms that we have free and clear title before I pay the earnest money. That way you avoid mediation altogether and you avoid the potential hassle of fighting over your earnest money. Simply add to your contract, earnest money to be paid upon confirmation from title that there is free and clear title. Now listen, earnest money is a big part of wholesaling and flipping, so it's important you learn how to really manage it well. I did another video where I break down everything you need to know about earnest money, so if you want to get an even better understanding of earnest money, watch this video right here. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to my channel. This is the #1 channel on YouTube for all things wholesaling and flipping, and I'll see you on the next video.